He said I didn't belong at the table. So I built the report the table stood on. By the time they noticed, the investors had already read my name first. Mondays at Strathmore Capital were predictable. Nate's voice would carry over the open floor at exactly 9:01 a.m., coffee in hand, comment ready. It wasn't always cruel, just calculated. This time, it was a small chuckle as he slid into the Zoom call with the New York investor group. I had just posted the weekly deck. "You left the attribution section empty again," he said, unmuted, smirking like we were in on some inside joke. "Don't worry, I'll fill in Chase's name. She's got the MBA, your support." I didn't flinch, not externally. Internally, though, there was a low, growing hum, a line being crossed again, but not loudly enough to raise alarms, just enough to stain the air between us. Chase didn't look up from her screen. She never did when he said things like that. And why would she? Nate's bias wasn't news, it was a culture. His MBA to respect ratio was legendary. And I was the one who cleaned up the financial projections every Friday night while they posted rooftop cocktail photos. The one who reverse engineered the back-end Excel formulas no one dared touch after Q1 imploded. The one who found the missing 2.7 millimeter margin error before it went into the investor update. But none of that earned me a seat. "Just send me the numbers," Nate had said more than once. "Don't need the backstory." The backstory, of course, was what made the numbers right, and what made my hands tremble only after the Zoom ended, not during. That Monday, something shifted. I reread his words in the meeting transcript. She support. Not she supports, not she collaborates. She is support. As if I were a printer that jammed occasionally. I didn't get angry. I got surgical. That evening, after most had left, I reopened the Q3 nomination template. It had been sitting idle in our shared drive, untouched by Nate, ignored by Chase, forgotten by the rest. It was the one document we were supposed to update for internal recognition votes. Symbolic? Sure. But it also got posted to the investor portal each quarter as part of our transparency package. And this time, I wasn't leaving attribution blank. I added every cross-functional collaboration I'd led in Q3, every last-minute fix, every silent save, all hyperlinked, all time-stamped. I didn't exaggerate. I just didn't edit myself down to support anymore. By 11:43 p.m., it was ready. I didn't ask permission. I clicked Submit Nomination. The confirmation ping echoed in the dark like a verdict. The next morning, I arrived to silence. Not passive-aggressive silence, just stillness. Until, at 9:06 a.m., Nate's voice cracked through again, loud and thin. Did someone push the Q3 nomination live without review? I didn't answer, because I wasn't supposed to. At 9:12, a new email popped into the general inbox. Subject, Investor Request, Updated Key Contributors List. Sender, External. And that's when the momentum shifted. She didn't ask for credit, but the investors had already noticed her fingerprints. The email had no warmth, just one line. Please confirm the updated key contributors list. The investors have a few follow-up questions. It landed like a dropped glass in a quiet room. Nate opened it first, then immediately pinged me with a Slack message that felt like a warning masked as a joke. You hit publish early? Risky move, rockstar. No smiley face, no winking emoji, just rockstar. He always used that word when he was circling, when he smelled ambition where he thought there should only be silence. But by then, the contributors list had already been scraped by the investor portal crawler. The rep had seen it, forwarded it, shared it in the next internal thread. And I was listed first, not alphabetically, not by accident, by impact. They knew. And the more they knew, the more dangerous I became. Not to the company, to the hierarchy that fed Nate. By 10:20 a.m., he was hovering behind my desk. You didn't mention you were submitting yourself for Q3, he said lightly, like we were two old friends catching up over coffee. Bit unusual not to root that through me. I looked up, just enough to make eye contact, but not enough to make it a scene. I followed policy, I said calmly. It's an open nomination system. Self-noms are allowed. His jaw tensed. I watched it happen in slow motion, his reflex to remind me who he thought I was. Support, not spotlight. But policy was a wall he couldn't breach without exposing himself. The irony? He was the one who pitched the self-nomination model during Q1's leadership sync, called it A modern way to empower undervalued talent. I had the notes, so I waited. At 11:00 a.m., Chase tried to re-upload the contributors list. Same file name, but with reordered credits. Hers first, mine second. No red lines, no track changes. Quiet revisionism. But our compliance system caught the metadata change. IT flagged it automatically and sent a mirrored copy to legal. By lunchtime, I had an unscheduled 1.1 invite from Rachel, our VP of Ops, the kind of calendar request that made your spine straighten. The subject line just said, visibility. I stepped into her glass-walled office with my heart trying to stay small in my chest. She didn't offer a chair. I reviewed your Q3 nomination, she said, flipping through her annotated printout. And the linked documentation. Thorough. I nodded. I tried to be clear. You were, she said, and paused. Too clear for some, maybe. The air between us hung sharp. Then she added, almost with curiosity, you didn't mention Nate anywhere, not even once. I kept my voice steady. He wasn't involved in the projects I submitted. She studied me, then leaned back. We've been watching how bandwidth actually moves around here. You just gave us something tangible. A beat, a shift. Then, let them come to you. That afternoon, Nate didn't speak. Not a glance in the hallway, not a Slack ping, just absence, like a wire that suddenly stopped humming. At 3:45 p.m., another email arrived. Same investor rep. This time, with a direct question. Can we schedule a call with the lead behind the margin reconciliation? I read the line 3 times. Lead. I had worked in shadows for so long, I forgot what direct light felt like. He called her support. Now the investors were calling her by name. Ever been underestimated at work? Hit subscribe and share your story. Someone needs to hear it. Wednesday's forecast was the same. Humid, gray, and static. But inside Strathmore's office, the pressure was entirely man-made. Nate's silence was no longer passive. It was precision engineered. Every time I spoke in a meeting, he looked elsewhere. When I shared a project update, he clicked his pen. When I corrected Chase's data model in the Q3 workbook, he deleted the row header I had fixed, then retyped it, uncredited. It wasn't just resentment. It was control slipping through his fingers. And I wasn't grabbing power. I was simply no longer hiding my hands. At 10:06 a.m., Rachel forwarded me a new message from the investors. They'd confirmed the contributor list for the next investor update. My name was now formally tied to the executive summary. That meant visibility not just inside the building, but beyond it, into the hands of people who moved money, influenced futures. 10 minutes later, I noticed something. The old contributors folder? Gone. Nate had archived it. Renamed it Archive R Prelim Q3 and locked editing. Access, Chase, Nate, and admin only. But he forgot one thing. I had version history. I didn't need to touch it, just screenshotted the metadata. Timestamp, 9:32 a.m. User, N. Barrett, Strathmore. I didn't send it to anyone. I saved it quietly, like a receipt you might need in a different season. By lunch, a subtle shift rippled through Slack. I received 3 private messages. One from Joelle in compliance, heads up, you're being discussed in a different thread. One from Darius in BI, hey, that reconciliation call with investors, huge. And one from an unknown alias, Milo704. He's scrambling, stay clean. No signature, just that. It could have been anyone, and yet it felt like someone who knew. At 2:15 p.m., the floor held a brief celebration for Chase's birthday. Cupcakes, sparkling cider, polite applause. Nate hovered like a stage dad. I joined in, but quietly. I clapped. I smiled. I kept my hands clean. Then I noticed the small detail that twisted the scene. Pinned to the corkboard outside the meeting room was a printed version of the Q3 nomination highlights. Page 2. Key contributors. First name listed, mine. Next to it, a sticky note. Blue ink, unreadable at first glance. But when I stepped closer, I caught the words, support, huh? No signature. Nate passed behind me slowly. Congrats, he said flatly, without looking. Guess investors like a good Cinderella story. I didn't reply, because I wasn't the one who needed a fairy tale. I had facts, files, and now formal credit. He still had his MBA, but the investors? They were rereading the story and asking who really authored the ending. Thursday arrived with that strange kind of quiet that doesn't calm, it warns. The air conditioning hummed too loud, the keyboard clicks felt too sharp. It was the kind of stillness that made people glance over their monitors when someone coughed, just to make sure the wrong name hadn't just been said. By mid-morning, Chase had gone full ghost. No updates, no Slack messages, just a calendar block that read 1-1 Nate Review. It lasted 17 minutes. She came back with mascara smudged slightly under one eye. No one mentioned it, but everyone noticed. At 10:32 a.m., I got copied on an internal thread titled Clarification of Roles, Q3 Deliverables. Attached, a PDF, one page, redrafted contributor list, new formatting, no ranks, just alphabetical order. My name? Third. I stared at it. No emotion at first, just the clinical realization. This wasn't oversight. It was strategy. A slow unspooling of visibility, Nate's way of soft deleting people, but they were too late. I had already been on the investor call. Wednesday evening, while Chase had prepped for her birthday gathering and Nate refreshed his LinkedIn profile for visibility stats, I had been in a side Zoom room with Strathmore's largest private stakeholder. Walk us through your audit logic, they'd said. I did. Where did the margin shift first appear? I showed them the cells, the change log. The pivot error from Q1 Chase had never corrected. Not once did I use the words her fault. Not once did I mention Nate. I only showed what was. By the end of the call, I had an email CCing legal, Rachel, and the board secretary. We recommend preserving the original contributors list for transparency. The implication was clear. Alterations wouldn't be tolerated. Still, Nate tried. By Friday morning, an all-hands invite went out. Q3 wrap and vision forward. Mandatory, 9 a.m. sharp. He was going to reframe the narrative. You could feel it in the subject line. And I wore navy, tied my hair back, and brought a notepad. Not for notes, for presence. I walked into the conference room last. Rachel looked up, nodded. That was all. The lights dimmed. Nate stepped forward. His voice was steady, but his eyes were twitching at the edges. We've had a strong quarter, as always, a team effort. Slide 1, big numbers, pretty charts, no faces. Slide 2, key contributors, alphabetical, but then slide 3. Spotlight Margin Accuracy Task Force. Just one name. Mine. Silence, then claps. Hesitant, then stronger. Rachel didn't clap. She looked at Nate. Nate, she said casually, you left off the audit escalation email. Might want to pull that up. His hand froze on the clicker. He knew. She knew. Everyone knew. And I sat still, like someone who had finally stopped apologizing for being essential. You'd think after the applause, after the spotlight slide, after Rachel's calm but public redirect, Nate would pivot. Maybe take the loss with grace, maybe reset the tone, maybe even, just maybe, say thank you. He didn't. What he did instead was quieter, slimier. He started rewriting history. It began in small moments. He asked Chase to remind everyone during stand-up that she had originally initiated the margin review, even though I had the audit trail from 3 months prior. She stumbled through it, her voice thin. Next, he started attaching me to low-visibility tasks, a shared inbox audit, a legacy Excel file just for backup. He marked it all as critical in Asana, but the rest of the team knew this was janitorial work dressed in corporate armor. Still, I stayed steady. Every time he tried to isolate me, another reminder of reality came back into the room. At 11:04 a.m. on Tuesday, the next investor update arrived. It included a quote. The margin anomaly was flagged and corrected before it impacted reporting. We commend the diligence of the lead analyst involved. No name, but everyone knew, because that quote, it matched a line I had written in my nomination, word for word. Chase printed it out and taped it behind her monitor. I don't know why. Maybe guilt, maybe envy, maybe a quiet apology. Nate, on the other hand, went into overdrive. That afternoon, he sent an email titled, Clarification of Q3 Contributions for Record. It went to legal, ops, the board liaison, and even the head of HR, a 5-paragraph essay explaining the collaborative nature of deliverables and how supporting functions often shine because of strong leadership. Translation: I only succeeded because of his management. He signed it with his full name, MBA PMP Senior Der, Ops. And below that, a quote: Leadership is knowing when to step back and let others rise. The irony could have cracked the floor tiles. I didn't reply, but Rachel did. Nate, thank you for the context. As discussed, the audit logs and investor testimony speak for themselves. We consider the Q3 record closed. That was it. Stamped. Final. At 3:17 p.m., I got a direct message from Milo Zowefer again. This time, it just said, notice how quiet it is now. They were right. Nate didn't call me out anymore. He didn't ping me with quick asks or assign invisible labor, because the room had changed, because the list was permanent, because someone with an MBA tried to erase me, and got outperformed by someone who knew where the numbers lived. It started showing up in places Nate couldn't edit. LinkedIn posts, whispers at industry mixers, an internal newsletter with a bold headline, From Shadows to Spotlight. Analyst saves Q3 margin forecast. No name, but the timeline, the role, the project titles, clear as daylight. Someone had written about me. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't flattery. It was documentation. The kind that lives longer than memory, longer than titles, longer than resentment. And Nate? He kept walking around the office like someone whose shoes had shrunk overnight, still trying to act normal while blistering with every step. His behavior shifted into strange rituals. First, he started CCing Rachel on everything, even when emailing me about something trivial like, hey, can you check cell G27? Next, he began dropping phrases like cross-functional synergy and team-based recognition in meetings where no one asked. Then came the weirdest thing. He started asking Chase to mentor me, loudly, publicly. As a senior analyst, Chase can really help her polish her storytelling for future investor-facing conversations. I was already in those conversations. I'd already been quoted. Chase blinked, caught in the crossfire of performative allyship. She gave a tight smile and said, I think she's doing pretty great already. That silence afterward, sharper than any critique. But what no one expected was what arrived next. At 2:04 p.m. on Thursday, HR sent out a calendar invite for the annual leadership rotation program. It was supposed to be a formality, an internal shuffle that rarely caused waves. Except this time, there was a new rule. Candidates for the rotation needed to have been named in a key contributor capacity in the past 6 months, with documentation available upon request. Guess who had that? Guess who didn't? Nate's name had never been attached to the Q3 margin audit. He had removed himself from the record, thinking he was clearing the path for control. Instead, he'd erased his eligibility. When the preliminary list was released Friday at noon, his name was nowhere. Mine? Third on the short list. Again, not alphabetically. He stared at the screen in the break room, didn't say a word, didn't sip his coffee, just stood there, alone. You could almost hear it, the quiet collapse of assumed superiority, the sound of someone realizing that legacy titles and elite degrees don't overwrite evidence, especially not when the evidence is documented, time-stamped, and investor-approved. By the time the leadership rotation interview blocks went live, the tone inside Strathmore's walls had shifted from tense to oddly ceremonial. Everyone was watching everyone, not openly, but with that hyper-awareness of a system quietly recalibrating itself. You could feel it in how conversations paused when I walked into a room, or how Chase started including my name in project briefs without me asking, or how Nate began avoiding eye contact entirely, choosing instead to scan the room like he was suddenly the junior analyst, unsure of what came next. I didn't celebrate. I documented. Every calendar update, every congratulatory Slack thread, every subtle nod from people who used to look past me. This wasn't revenge. This was record keeping. At 9:41 a.m. on Tuesday, I entered conference room B for my rotation panel. 3 senior execs. 1 HR observer, 1 empty chair at the end. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. First question came from Sherry, head of strategy. Your Q3 contribution helped restore investor confidence. What would you replicate from that experience if given a broader leadership scope? Easy. Documentation over performance. Systems that reward clarity, not just charisma. Second question, how do you handle being underestimated? A beat, a breath. Then, I don't correct people in the moment. I build the proof they eventually trip over. Rachel smirked in the corner. The HR rep typed faster. Then came the third question, from someone I hadn't expected. Nate. He stepped into the room late, carrying a clipboard he didn't need. It wasn't scheduled, but no one stopped him. Legacy still bought small privileges. He didn't sit. He didn't smile. Just asked, "In your opinion, what's more valuable in leadership, education or pattern recognition?" I looked at him evenly. This was a test. His last attempt to bait me into self-minimization. "I think degrees can teach you frameworks," I said slowly, "but only experience shows you the real variables." A pause. "Also," I added, "not all MBAs recognize a broken pivot table when they see one." The room inhaled. Not a laugh, but something better. Respect. After the session ended, I stepped into the hallway. Milo Sudofor had finally revealed themselves. It was Joelle, from compliance. She handed me a flash drive. Internal copy of the original Q3 nomination and version logs, just in case. I didn't ask why, I just said thank you. And Nate? He stood in his glass office, watching it all unfold, hands in pockets. MBA framed behind him. But outside that glass? The narrative had moved on. Friday, 6:02 p.m. The lights over Strathmore's 17th floor had begun their nightly flicker, motion sensors trying to guess if anyone was still working or if the office had finally exhaled. I was still there. So was the silence. But it wasn't the same silence from before, the one shaped like fear. Now it was something denser, earned. On my screen, a final version of the internal rotation newsletter was open. I'd been asked to review my profile summary before publication. There it was, in clean font. Leady margin integrity audit for Q3 preventing a projected 2.7 mil loss, recognized by both internal operations and external investor panels. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't oversell. It was simply true. And right below that line, in soft italics, Q3 key contributor, top rank. It was surreal. Not because it was flashy. Strathmore never did flashy. But because for the first time in years, the work had been seen before being spun. No team effort footnotes. No corrections by Nate in red ink. No sudden updates to the contributors list. Just documentation and credit. Around 6:10 p.m., as I packed up, I heard the faint click of dress shoes behind me. Nate. He didn't speak immediately, just lingered a few feet away, pretending to review something on his phone. Then finally, "You handled all this pretty well," he said. Not an apology, more like an obituary for the power he used to hold. I nodded once. "Thanks." He glanced up. "Didn't expect it, to be honest. You were always quiet." "I still am," I replied. Then I zipped my bag. "But quiet doesn't mean absent." He gave a tight smile. "Guess not." And for the first time in a long time, I saw it. Realization. Not just that I'd been overlooked, but that the entire system he'd operated in, the MBA club, the buddy promotions, the casual erasures, was no longer fireproof. Because investors weren't asking for degrees anymore. They were asking for results, for traceable action, for clarity over charm. As I walked toward the elevator, I passed the community board near the reception area. Pinned on it, freshly laminated, was the full Q3 nomination digest. Still visible, still unchanged, still showing my name first. Someone had added a quote in marker below it. "Quiet doesn't mean small." No signature, but I didn't need one. Because now the work had a weight that didn't need voices to prove it. The Monday after the newsletter went live, the building felt lighter. It wasn't that people were suddenly kind, or that the office had transformed into some inclusive utopia. Strathmore wasn't built for that kind of miracle. But the temperature had changed. Like the hallway air had been purged of a tension no one had acknowledged until it left. People smiled more. Meetings started on time. Chase even made eye contact during the ops sync and passed me the clicker without hesitation. No one said it out loud, but the rules had changed. Not by policy, by precedent. Because someone had shown that a title without ethics is just a hollow plaque, that an MBA can't reverse a spreadsheet error or fabricate proof where none exists. And that being support doesn't mean silent compliance. It can mean foundation. The rotation offer came in at 11:17 a.m., a formal memo signed by the exec board. Subject line, Leadership Track Acceptance, Phase 1. No interview, no rebuttals, just a slot. Mine. The irony? It included a mentorship clause. I'd be paired with a rotating junior analyst from the new class, someone who'd probably never know how many nights I stayed correcting other people's files, or how many times I chose silence over sarcasm, or how many words I didn't say in front of Nate until the work made them unnecessary. That afternoon, I passed his office, empty, blinds half drawn, the MBA certificate still hanging, but now it looked like decoration, not authority. Word had gotten around that Nate was being moved into a strategic advisory role. No team, no direct reports. A job title designed to park someone sideways until they found the door themselves. It wasn't revenge. It was just gravity. Eventually, everything finds its level. Joelle caught me in the elevator later that day. "Congrats," she said, her smile as calm as always. "You knew before I did," I replied. "Didn't need to," she shrugged. "You made it undeniable." That word stuck with me. Undeniable. Not loud, not ruthless, just unmistakably present. That evening, I updated my LinkedIn, not to brag, just to mark it. Incoming participant, Leadership Rotation Program, Strathmore Capital, Q3 Key Contributor, Margin Accuracy Task Force. 5 minutes later, I got a connection request from the investor rep who'd started it all. A message attached, "Looking forward to seeing where you go next." So was I, because now I was finally in the room, not because I'd broken down the door, but because I built the system they were now standing on,